Hello everyone, my name is David Arroyo, and in this video I'm going to be talking about composition within art specifically. Now composition is quite important. It's what creates that structure that your image needs in order to become pleasing to our eyes. Without composition, it might be a great drawing, but something will feel off. So composition is something that obviously I also teach in my concept art course, and what I'm going to be showing you today is an exercise that I do in my class with the students, and to give you guys an idea of something that you could do at your home and practice yourself. And I'm not going to be giving a lesson on this, but it's more like this video is more about just showing you how I do it and then giving you a few pointers on what you should pay attention to and all these type of things. And then towards the end of the video, I'll give you a good tip on how you could improve your composition as well. Right, let's get started. Okay, so these are the 9 shots that we're going to be discussing. This comes from an exercise from my concept art course where students are given 9 different scenarios written out onto a whiteboard, and they get 25 minutes per scenario to draw it out. So normally they find the composition quite quickly on, and then the rest of the time is just for adding additional shading or any type of detail that you'd like. Now, don't worry too much about time. We'll tackle that later on. First, imagine that this is your frame. Whether it's a picture or a drawing, doesn't matter. Now, within a frame, the golden ratio, which is what you're seeing, is basically that point of interest that you want to put your subject in. This golden ratio could exist in many different places. It could be mirrored to the other side, or to the top of the frame, or again on the 4 points as you're seeing here. Now that creates the rule of thirds, which is what you are seeing right here. The rule of thirds is basically a simplified version of the golden ratio, and that's what we tend to apply in our work. So here you got the 9 shots again, and we're going to start looking at how I start applying the rule of thirds and golden ratio to all of these things. So the very first shot was a husband and wife at a restaurant having a dinner. The wife is explaining about her day and she's all happy and joyful. And as you can see, it's a pretty classic setup. It's a rule of thirds, as you can see, on one side the wife, on one side the husband. Now, there are different ways of framing this. You could have also just put the mirror dead center in the mirror, the window dead center, and then the husband on the side and the wife on the other side, and create a perfect symmetry. Also, very interesting shot. The second one is a sound engineer recording a podcast, or a DJ if you will, and he's inside his sound studio. And again, here you can see that finding the actual composition is done quite quickly. Okay, all you have to do is just follow the rules of thirds and say, okay, am I going to put him on the left side, on the right side? There are other ways of doing this. Again, this is not the only way, but you can immediately see that this is applied. I've seen some of my students do a completely different composition for this, and it also looked very, very good. Also, within their compositions, the rule of thirds was applied. Now, the third shot is a romantic shot, very classic again, where a guy is just about to kiss a girl. And you can also see here that they are quite centered. Now, you can also pull off this shot with much more zoom in, zooming in even more. And this also tends to happen during the movie. They're about to kiss. That's not a full zoom in yet, but when the actual kiss happens, it goes a little bit closer, or tends to happen. So very classic, also rule of thirds. Now in the fourth shot, this is where you see that perspective is also quite important sometimes when you are designing shots or creating things. So this perspective is basically whole hand drawn. I'm not using any rulers or anything. I'm just eyeballing the perspective. The perspective. And as you can see, the third shot is basically about a teacher that comes out of his class and goes to his car. Now, one of the cars had to be a little bit more emphasized in terms of it's lighter than the rest to give it a bit of attention. You'll see that the teacher, which is standing in the middle of the road towards the right, he is more or less on the third line on the on the rule of thirds on the right. And then that white car, there's a car that's a little bit whiter than the rest. That's the one that is towards the other side of the composition within the rule of thirds. Now, looking at shot number 5, it's basically a guy that is he's basically robbing a store, and he's telling the clerk to empty out the cash register. Also, pretty classic shot. Again, there are different ways of drawing this, so I just want you guys to know that what I'm drawing here, they are not the only ways of creating these shots. This is just pretty safe, pretty classic type of shots, pretty standard what you will see in film. But again, you can see here the rule of thirds being applied. Also whatever is closest to you may be interesting for you to know. When shading, you provide the darker tones. Like in my case, I just go fully black, like in a comic book, and then whatever is furthest away from you gets lighter and lighter. The sixth shot is basically a knight protecting his daughter or a little girl from a monster. Now, there are two ways of doing this, and I actually did do this in two different ways. This shot actually took me a whole lot longer because I wanted to show two different versions of it. Not only that, I was more satisfied with the second version of it. But I decided to keep this in the video because you can really see the difference in there. So, and also my shading was much better in the second one. But as you can see, this is one way that it would have worked. So they're in a burning village, so there's fire everywhere, and that monster is there. You can only see the hand of the monster, which is an interesting trick to apply. Instead of showing the entire monster, you can just show a hand or part of his like leg or something, but something that is quite threatening, so that you can immediately make out that it is a monster that you're dealing with. And then on the other side, again, paying attention to the rule of thirds, you can focus on the soldier and his daughter. Now, of course, as you can see here, the shading is far from done. I was struggling quite a bit to get the shading right. Also, in these type of night scenarios, it's very useful to block out your light very strongly. So that's why I added much more light on the hand. Basically, it helps to create your silhouettes. So night shots, they're quite useful. I've also added different blades to the monster. I was still designing the monster as we went. And then here you can see that I wanted to try out something else. So the previous shot would have worked just as fine. But in this one, it's a more classical or more heroic, basically, type of shot. Okay, where you have the knight in the middle protecting the girl, and there's a monster, which I made much bigger this time, going over the actual hero to make the monster and to make the threat look even bigger. But I like this because it created more playing on the light. I had more of a central heroic type of shot. So again, it's just to show you that there are different ways of doing it. You don't always have to go for one or the other. And that's what I really like about exercises like these, especially when you do them in class. You can see how many different students, they have so different ways of looking at it, and there is not one right answer. Of course, if the composition is off, then there are always improvements that you can make. But there are many different ways to achieve the same result, and everything depends on the type of emotion that you want to portray. Okay, so for example, this shot clearly didn't take 25 minutes. This took me much longer. I think, more or less like about 40 minutes per attempt. So because I was looking more for the type of shading, the type of lighting that I wanted. So I left it at that for this particular shot. Going to shot number 7. So this was like a demon hunter type of thing or something similar, that she had crossbows. And she arrived at this castle, which I described as some type of like dragon castle, but it was really big. So she had to stand at the gates of this castle. And so that's what you're seeing me draw right now. So as you can see, again, with the previous shots, the composition is found quite quickly. That doesn't take really that long. You do your drawing, and everything I do after that, which is what I'm doing right now, it's just additional shading. So the same when you do storyboarding. You can storyboard up to a certain point, and most of the time within a professional environment, if you do presentation boards, I don't know, it takes maybe about 20 minutes or 25 minutes per shot. If you do shooting boards, it has to happen quickly on the spot, so literally you only focus on designing the composition itself. So all this fancy stuff that I'm adding right now, the additional lighting and the additional shading, that you don't do in shooting boards at all. You don't have time for that. But in presentation boards, you can. Especially the first 4 frames, or actually the first 5. The first 5 shots that you're looking at here, they were done within the 25-minute mark each. The last 4, except for the very last one, you'll see it towards the end. That one was done, I think, in about 30-ish minutes, more or less. I might be wrong. It might have been a little bit more, but it was faster than, for example, this one as well. Here again, now I'm just letting myself go into the details, doing the lighting, the shading, and all that type of stuff, seeing how I want to create all the contrasts, which is quite important when you start shading. The contrasts are very important. Making sure that your lights come through very nicely, that your darks, also come through. It's important to create a balance of black and whites. But that's another part of composition. At the beginning, I would strongly recommend to just purely focus on putting the elements in the right place. So this shot number 8 is basically like an invasion of zombies or monsters type of thing. And at the top, you've got 2 soldiers, like they're on a rooftop or something, shooting at the soldiers, at the zombies. One is reloading his weapon or doing something similar, like taking a break, and the other one is full-on firing. So here again, the composition is quite similar from what you would see in a video game. I did mention that video games are quite important in composition as well. Well, here the same thing, where you're going to put your character in a third-person shooter, for example. They also kind of follow, the rule of thirds when they position their cameras and stuff like that in video games. So it's quite similar. And here you can basically see it. So again, the composition was found quite early on. The elements, I knew exactly where I wanted them. And now I go back to shading, because it's a night shot. So in night shots, there's always much more ink to do. You will notice if you do comic books, night shots, they just take longer. You can also start almost with a black canvas and then draw negative, basically draw with white instead. But, it depends. I prefer doing it this way, starting with a white canvas and then, achieving the results here. Again, with night shots, it's very important to really light your characters in the forefront quite not aggressively, but strongly, so that you can really create these strong silhouettes, especially in black and white. It's important to see that. Here I was playing around a bit with different type of light spots, but this is more or less the 8th shot, which is, I'll be honest, my least favorite out of the 9, because I think I could have gone even further, but it does get the point across. Then the last shot with motorcycles. So this one I really actually like quite a lot, and it happened quite quickly. So it's on a highway, think of an intercity highway. And there's a motorcycle chase, and they have to go in between cars and stuff like that. Now, if you've noticed, I immediately drew out 2 lines at the very beginning. If you haven't seen it, just go back to the beginning of when I was drawing this. There were 2 lines, and one was facing one way, one was facing the other way, and I immediately applied the rule of thirds here to get that feeling that I really wanted to get for this shot. It's basically just preparing yourself for what you already know is going to happen, and it's kind of like also setting up the line of action, which is very important in these type of shots. You want to guide your eye a certain way in these shots. So here again, once the composition is set up, I move on to just doing the shading, doing the the additional colors, the lighting, and trying different things out just to sell the shot a little bit more. But the most important stuff was really already in place within the first few minutes of the drawing. Most of the time, I find the composition within my first 2 minutes of drawing. At least the ideas are there. I know exactly where I want all my characters to be, and all the rest that follows, that's just a whole bunch of additional details. Here you can see the rule of thirds applied, so I've quickly added the grid for you, and that's just so that you can see how the composition was made and the planning of the shot was created, basically. And so there you have it. All right, and so these were my 9 shots that I wanted to share with you. I hope you learned something from it. And now for the exercise that you can try at home yourself. Right, so here, this is it. Try to find a comic book that you really like, one that you already have in your house or one that you find online. Web comics, there's plenty of them and they're free, so it doesn't cost you anything. And find 2 pages out of that comic book and try to redesign the layout for film. So you use the same shots that I used, like 16:9 or anamorphic, you can choose, and then try to change the comic book into a film. So it only take 2 pages, don't give yourself too much work. So an example is, this is a comic book that I really love, it's Black Sat. Definitely worth it, by Diaz Canales and Guarnido. Give it a try. I've got 2 pages in there that I really love. Okay, I hope you can see this. And it's basically turning these pages into a storyboard for film. That's basically what you should do, or give it a try. Okay, now often you can see the composition is already there. That would apply for film, but obviously the aspect ratios are always different. In comics, you don't have to always follow the 16:9. You can have more freedom there. But it's a really good exercise because it already provides you all the elements that you need. You already have a bit of an idea of the way the composition is set up. And at the same time, all you have to do is just apply what you've already learned into a film aspect ratio. So give it a try and let me know how you did in the comments below. All right, well, thank you very much for stopping by. If you like this type of content, as usual, leave a like, subscribe. You can always click on that bell to stay notified of when I upload new videos. And there you go. I'll see you guys in the next one.